and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin, and this is the show where you can have your property-related questions answered by our team of property experts. And joining me today is Ryan Hughes, founder of the Investa.com buy-to-let experts. Welcome to you, Ryan.
Thanks, Stephen.
Joining Ryan is Richard Murray, CEO of Eurolink Technology, suppliers of Vico property management software. Welcome to you again, Richard.
Good to be back.
Good to see you here. Thank you both very much for coming in. Ryan, we're going to start off with you, and your first question is this. Can the panel please explain the difference in the licensing obligations between co-living and HMO projects, or are they effectively one and the same thing?
I'm still see it as very much a buzzword, but it's constantly adapting from what it originally was. HMO is still very standard. Anything above 5 people needs a HMO license. Some of this new co-living, part buzzword, modern HMO, but now coming with a different angle of subscription models, is a new way of doing that bills inclusive model, of being part of a club, creating these new environments for people to stay in, rather than the original HMO where you just want to house share but not necessarily share the facilities. You just wanted your room and you wanted cheaper rent. Now the reason I say buzzword is because it's a spin on a HMO, in my opinion, because depending on the individuals that live there, they create their environment. As much as some of these new co-living have property managers, I know myself, when we dealt with a lot of HMOs, we would do some of them things of get pizzas on a Friday, do events, do monthly events, do Halloween parties. Maybe we was ahead of the time, I don't know. But to us, that was a standard of creating an environment where people wanted to stay. And it was more for the retention rate. If you created somewhere, because in shared accommodation, some people can't afford higher, or they want the experience, especially the student market. They wanted, the campus facilities weren't good enough, but they still wanted that student experience, and a HMO was a perfect place to provide that, especially internationally. If people are coming over individually or as a couple and they want to create new friends, that for me is the new co-living. The subscription thing is still something we're very new to, and we don't come across a lot of it, but I know people are now offering packages where, you know, your bills are included and your Netflix and your Wi-Fi subscriptions, but of a less size, not always necessarily a HMO size of property.
But I think we've seen one or two down here, Ryan, that are, I've got to be honest, glorified hotels in a way. The common facilities are just superb. They've spent millions and millions of pounds on them. And actually, the emphasis has gone away from the room you stay in to the facilities that surround you. So you've got relatively small, compact rooms, but then you come out into these amazing, you know, maybe 2 or 3 kitchen areas, a cinema room, you know, dining areas where you can book private dining areas if you want to, this sort of thing.
I think that to me though is the biggest difference if you're talking about co-living in that style of environment compared to a HMO, a traditional HMO being 5, 6, 7 bedroom house converted with a communal area and on-site shower facilities. Co-living in this new style of apartment developments that we've seen, it's a completely different investment and a different way of living. Because
I just wonder what the local authorities' view of it is. I mean, it's almost closer to hotel use or serviced accommodation use rather than HMO licensing, isn't it?
That's where I see it, of more of that buzzword. Unless you're doing it as the subscription package, that co-living is very much glorified long hotel stays and that bordering Airbnb style of having all the facilities. That's why I only say buzzword, because I'm like, well, what's the difference here? Because you're talking about potentially 2 different types of properties. There's a clear indication of a HMO house and a co-living block of apartments because it is only the apartment blocks that have 2 or 3 kitchens. There's not houses with 2 or 3 kitchens and swimming pools and gyms. So the spec is always going to be higher because the cost is split between a lot more people.
I'm just wondering, from a business planning point of view, it must be quite difficult, because if you create one of these super dwellings, shall we call them, I'm not quite sure how the council tax would work, because if you yourself have got a tiny room, okay, so you'd want it based on the size of that room, wouldn't you? Because that's your only private accommodation part. The other is communal. I don't know how you'd pay the council tax for that, or how it would be licensed. I really just don't know.
I think there's some which is where it's a very much a grey area, because there's so many different styles of it. It's very much like student accommodation in certain areas. You don't pay stamp duty, but then because it goes above the £40,000 threshold, you do pay stamp duty, but it's still purpose-built, classed as commercial. The co-living, we've seen people that own in a co-living block, but there's just too many different versions of it for me, and they brand themselves as co-living. They own it, but it's like, well, why do you own something that you live in from an investment point of view?
Well, there's certain investments where you can buy a hotel room, for instance, aren't there? So,
We've
I
done
think
that.
exactly that. Yeah, I think it will come down to the configuration of said accommodation will fall into the right legislation, won't it? It has to do. But I think what you guys are talking about is almost like a yearning for community.
Yeah.
We've spent a generation where really community has been lost. And I think there's a demand for that now. And I think this co-living, or however you want to, as you say, buzzword it or dress it up, you guys saying we were doing pizza nights and Halloween nights, you were creating a community.
Yeah.
And people, then you were saying that helped with retention, but actually it was the community that you developed clearly that was probably getting
it is a social change, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I live across the road here, and I mean, there's only 4 flats per floor level. I couldn't tell you who my neighbours are. In fact, I'm not even sure I've ever seen them. So.
But I think there's a demand now. The younger generations, there's definitely a demand for that community living.
I believe there's a huge demand for it because of that COVID period. Some of the people that are no longer going to university and want that university experience, that free willingness to still communicate and make new friends, because we're now, networking has always been a thing, way before my time. But now the networking is almost not just a business level, it's also a friendship level. And that's what these places are creating, because people will sit there in these communal areas on the laptops, but they're not in their apartment or they're not in their living space, because they want to speak to the person next to them and build them relationships.
Yes, and working from home and everything that goes with that as
Yeah.
well.
Unless, of course, we take Mr. Zuckerberg's advice and all retreat into the meta universe, I suppose. What do we think?
Not going too well at the moment.
Not too well at all, is it? No. Right. Somebody tried to sell me a portion of Canary Wharf the other day for some of these tokens. I'm afraid I just can't get my mind around buying a bit of cardboard or whatever.
After you pass level 10.
yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. Richard, I'm considering purchasing a software management program for my estate agency. I have 3 offices, and I'm afraid to say a mishmash of computer equipment across the firm. Is it likely that any provider I buy from will insist that I standardise my equipment, or is a mixture of Apple and Windows equipment acceptable? Naturally, I'm concerned about and want to consider any supplemental costs over and above that of just the program. I can imagine that'd be quite a widely asked question, isn't it?
I think it has been in the past. I think less so now. My concerns for this agency would be that they need an audit. They need an IT audit to make sure that all that mishmash, I think you referred to it, of hardware is on the most up-to-date operating systems, has the most up-to-date software versions. Firmware on the printers, just protecting the organisation really from cybercrime. That would be my first concern. But getting back to the actual question, I think these days, most systems, most software is web-based, so it's accessed via a browser. So really, you're not. It doesn't really matter what the device is. Apple.
But I mean, I know I switched both my laptop and my PC sort of, I think it was last Christmas when I did. And even though my other stuff was only probably 2-3 years old, the difference was amazing. You know, hugely upgrading. And I think a lot of business managers don't quite appreciate the amount of lost time that you can end up with outdated systems and old equipment. I mean, I take your point. A lot of it is cloud-based now, so it's not quite as critical as it was. No. I mean, but you know, let's say somebody has a nice 27-inch PC, nice screen, all-in-one on the desk. I mean, how long would you expect these sort of things to last for? Would you recommend a change every 3, 4 years, 5 years?
I think it's difficult to say, and everything's moving very, very quickly, and the hardware is becoming less of the issue, and it's more obviously the operating system and the software that it sits on. I think, look, in this particular example, I would strongly recommend a full IT audit, like I said, and make sure that they're not exposing themselves seriously to
problems,
to some serious problems. And again, you run a business, Ryan. You've got to be on top of these things.
I think the hard bit, though, Richard, to be fair to the questioner, it's very hard, isn't it, to get impartial advice about IT equipment.
Yeah, and there's personal preference as well. You're talking about someone working Windows or iOS or whatever it might be. But again, a modern software should be device agnostic. You know, you should be able to literally pick up any device, not only be able to access the software via a browser securely, but you should also it should also render to the size of screen. You know, you guys must use software in your organisation. You know, you want to pick up if you pick up an iPhone or a tablet or or jump onto the big screen that you mentioned a minute ago, you want to see the software in its best presentation in the collateral that you've got in front of you, and that's the sort of modern day way of approaching it. It's product agnostic.
You're not really going to answer this one, are you?
Well, I could send my IT firm in and our IT division in and say, right, go do an IT audit, and you could say, well, let's standardize everything across the organisation. And as an organisation gets bigger, you have to standardize it because everyone needs to be on the same version of the same.
Well, I'm thinking
software,
even maintenance contracts would be easier, wouldn't they, with consistent
a lot easier,
equipment. Yeah.
But you asked for a timescale, and I'm being accused of dodging the question here. So, for instance, SQL Server 2012 has just been recently given end of life, October 23. So it's a 2012 product out, and that when I mean end of life, it won't be supported after that. Yeah. It will run and run and run, believe me. Yeah. But I would have to give the advice that it's going out end of life, and you should consider upgrading that.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much for that. That's all we've got time for in this half of the show. So join me again after the break, and we'll be asking Richard and Ryan more of your questions. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and I'm joined by Ryan Hughes and Richard Murray. Welcome back, guys. So we'll get on straight with the questioning. And Ryan, I'm proposing to embark on my first letting project in the HMO market. I'm currently producing my budgets for my business plan. Can the panel please advise me that in relation to rates/council tax, should I seek a valuation for each room, which I can calculate into the rent to be charged, or will I simply be charged a form of business rate on the whole building as one unit?
I think it depends. When they say they're entering the HMO market, are they wanting to make a HMO in terms of converting a current property, or are they purchasing a current working HMO?
Let's assume they're buying a house and converting it to HMO.
So one of the services that we offer, one of the most important parts, is we provide all the full financial performance for each individual property. So if they wanted to purchase something, they could see the current financial performance of the HMO and how that landlord currently has it sitting, because it gets very complicated when you have void rooms. You get charged because they're individual lets, even though they're on a HMO. With certain changes, with certain areas that need HMO licensing, I believe that's constantly changing. So they'd have to look at, one, the area, two, is it currently a fully operational HMO? And if so, what is the current financial performance? It's one of the standards that...
So if I'm getting you right, there would be, in certain areas, a provision for relief from council tax if that room was void for a while.
I don't believe there would be. I believe you'd have to pay, because HMO comes with that student. The student gets exempt while they live there, so you don't have to pay it because they get an exemption from the university. But if that student's not there, during that period, you are liable for it. Same as purpose-built student accommodation, exactly the same. Even though it's purpose-built student accommodation and you don't pay council tax, if it's void, you do.
But for the sake, I mean, assuming that this is not student accommodation, let's say it's a, I'm loath to use the word, but normal HMO, let's say, that's
exactly
in the market.
same, because that's even more towards the residential side.
Right.
Because residential, you pay it on any property.
So to answer that, do the council do it room by room, do they?
From my previous experience, it was on the property, on the occupancy. So because you constantly, especially when you're not on an academic year, it was easy for us to track whether we had 10-month tenancy or a 12-month tenancy during that academic year and that was our experience because we specialised in student HMO, because it was easier. When you've constantly got a revolving door on a HMO, it gets a bit more complicated because everyone's on a different tenancy. So someone's 6-month tenancy is running out next month and someone's still got 3 or 4 months to go, and you constantly, depending on how many rooms, room 1's vacant for 4 weeks, room 6. So I would speak to the local authority of where they're purchasing and whether it's a HMO licence. Areas where there is a HMO licence, there'll be slightly different regulations to where it's a non-HMO licence, so they may do it more as a business.
Okay, because I suppose if there's no licensing requirement, there's no need, I suppose, other than safety regulations to regulate to register it as such.
Correct.
Have I got it? Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. Sorry. Right. Well, we got there in the end. Okay. How do you write a bit of software for that then?
Void reporting is crucial then. I mean, it's quite crucial across any sort of property management company, but particularly in that scenario. But we do a lot of void reporting across the board. It's great for agencies who are saying, well, how can we improve our bottom line? Well, look at your void reporting. Can you cut your void days down? 1 day, 2 days, 3 days across your portfolio. It actually makes a big difference, and we can forecast the fee income from that.
Right. I mean, I'm glad to see the viewer asking this question, because I think time and voids are two things in the property market that always cause trouble. Developers, they look at the cost, the building cost, the projected sales, all the rest of it, and they forget to think about how long it's going to take them to get from zero to completed product. It's always a questionable sort of thing. And again, with people that are going into renting, whether it's just buy-to-let or HMOs at the beginning, they forget about the voids, don't they?
Should always factor into your forecast, absolutely, yeah.
I think voids is the most crucial part with a HMO, because depending on what type of HMO, if you do have that situation where there's people on different tenancies, the turnover rate of tenant will be a lot higher, because as we've mentioned previously, them environments that are created in it, what you class as normal, but student HMOs and some residential HMOs, but you don't really get that community feel to it. They are people sometimes passing through on a 6 or a 12-month tenancy, and you constantly have a revolving door. You've not got that 100% occupancy for the last 2 or 3 years, because there's someone always changing.
I mean, that's the ideal, obviously, 100% occupancy, no voids. But actually, that's never going to happen. So it's how you manage that and report on it. But the occupancy will, like you say, like you used the phrase revolving door.
But you know, Richard, we did a programme not so long ago, not so many weeks ago, about data. And you just mentioned then that you can perhaps predict potential voids or various other factors in the market. These data people are telling us that they can actually even provide data that will estimate the likelihood of something coming to market within a street. They can estimate the financial status of those people that own in that street and whether they're likely to be wanting to sell quickly because of financial pressure and this sort of thing. It's quite amazing, isn't it, the amount of data that you can actually draw these days.
Absolutely. Well, the big data was the kind of buzzword a while back, but it's all about AI and machine learning now, and having just sheer level of access to multiple layers of data from multiple databases, and like you said, predicting financial status of said applicants in 2 to 3 or 2.3 years time, because that's when the next property is going to come up. It's going to help agents. All this technology is going to help agents.
I mean, somebody who was in agency years and years ago, I was listening to this and I thought, do you know what? I'd start a new agency and all I want is a keyboard and a button, because I don't need to talk to anybody.
You don't have your Rolodeck then? Huh?
No. I lost that a long time ago. But anyway, there we are. Okay, well, thanks for that. Richard, your question. The Bank of England and a number of other economists are predicting a recession lasting probably 2 to 3 years before any meaningful upturn takes place. Do the experts think that this will directly affect and depress the property market in parallel? And if so, will both volume of transactions and prices be affected?
Yeah, again, really difficult one to predict. But it depends which forecast you're looking at. It depends who's forecasting, what their drivers are for forecasting, and if you look at property companies, they're looking on the optimistic side. I think we are in a totally different scenario than we've ever seen before. I think the drivers for this particular financial crisis are just very different. There's no. We talked about data. There's no data to rely on. We can't go back to the Spanish flu and say, what was the data? What happened with the Spanish flu 110 years ago? Well, actually, this is what happened, and this was the recovery time, and this is what happened in the economy, because obviously it doesn't exist.
Yeah. But you see, I mean, it's funny, the whole market is full of contradictions, isn't it? Because you say, well, there's a lot of big retailers going bust at the moment. Oh, they're coming off the high streets. Oh dear, the high street's suffering. No, it ain't, because the rents are coming down. More and more people are going into the high street now because they can afford to take the leases on the shops. There's almost a contradiction there, isn't there, of the effects here. So I don't know what the real answer is. But whether, and again, when people say, is the property market going to go down? Well, which bit do they mean?
I was going to say, I think there's bubbles. We talked off air, didn't we, about London being a bubble, more affluent areas, overseas interest on your side. Overseas interest is surely going to be sky high at the moment. So I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. It depends where you're looking at, what type of property you're looking at. But traditionally, there'll be less properties on the market. Well, if there's less property on the market, there'll be more interest, there'll be more buyers. That tends historically to keep prices high. A lot of the analysis at the moment is they're not looking at some huge reset. There's not, there was shouts at 20% and 30%, wasn't it? But I think that was a little bit premature. Personally, I think let's say the CBRE research, the Financial Times recent commentary, I think somewhere between 5 to 10% across the next 2 years is probably more likely.
Now, we're a bit London-centric here, Ryan, so what about the Northwest then?
I think everywhere sort of outside London performs very, very similar. And I think from an owner-occupier perspective in the property market, things are just going to stabilise because more stock. There's not less stock, it's just coming back to a pre-COVID period, whereas we're sort of coming out of a mini boom, if you like, for the owner occupiers, and the fall through rate is also there now because of the mortgage rates changing. So actually a lot of these big prices that people seen or were possibly being achieved, a lot of them are coming back to the market due to the fall through rate. We've experienced, something on the market for 380, sells for 420. It's 3 or 4 months in the conveyancing process. It falls through. We resell it 385. I think it's just coming back from a buy-to-let perspective in the property market. It's a perfect time to sell. Rents are at an all-time high.
Yeah,
they're only going
yeah.
one way.
Yeah.
It's a perfect time to come in. If you're an owner-occupier, you need to look at the rates of what you can afford. People's affordability has changed dramatically, and I don't think that's from a lack of stock in terms of their appetite to purchase. It's their ability to what they can now purchase.
Yeah, but also the market, the speculative side of things will slow down, obviously, but the majority of the market is on a needs basis. Someone needs to move. They're relocating. They have outgrown their property. It's on a needs basis, and on a needs basis, there'll always be a market.
There'll always be a market.
But underlying, and again, UK centric, supply and demand. We just don't have the supply to satisfy the demand. So there'll always be. It's almost like being underpinned. It's almost like having a guarantee to underpin the property market.
Okay, well, on that happy note, we're going to have to call it a day. So thank you both very much for coming in. So Ryan Hughes, founder of the MrInvestor.com brand, thank you very much for coming in. Richard Merry, CEO of Eurolink Technology, thank you for coming in. Great answers to the questions today. Thank you both very much indeed. I'm Stephen Galpin. I'll see you next time on Property Question Time.